J.K. Dobbins went down with a left knee injury, and in this video, we're going to take a look at what happened and how serious it might be. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. Let's get right to the play where this happened here. You guys know what to do if you enjoy this channel and want to help support these videos. So Dobbins is running out here, and keep an eye on that left leg as he gets tackled, because essentially what happens is his left knee gets forced right there into a hyperextended position. As the Washington defender comes in, that left shoulder pad makes contact right at kind of the lower portion of Dobbins's thigh as that left foot is planting, and so that results in that knee being pushed backwards into a hyperextended position. Now, hyperextension injuries are really difficult to judge just based on video footage. There's a couple of factors that play into the severity, one of which is just the degrees or the severity of hyperextension. Some studies in cadavers have found that around 30 degrees of hyperextension is sort of a critical point for when we worry about the ACL and the PCL, but to be honest, looking at the play here for Dobbins, it's really tough. We can't get a good assessment in terms of the angle or the severity of the hyperextension. Flexion is whenever you bend your knee or bring your heel up to your bottom, and extension is whenever you straighten it out. So hyperextension is when you straighten it beyond that neutral point and the knee gets pushed backwards. One of the most recent and honestly astonishing instances of this was Giannis Antetokounmpo here in the recent NBA playoffs. He suffered a really bad hyperextension, and look how severe his was. So this is exactly what I'm talking about with that hyperextended position. So if we imagine drawing a straight line from his thigh down, that's going to be a neutral position. So anything where the foot is beyond in this direction is that hyperextension. So now that we've pictured this with Giannis, let's look back at Dobbins. Again, he comes in here, he plants with that left foot, that left knee gets hyperextended, bent backwards. Another key aspect of how serious these can be is the amount of inward or outward movement and force that we see on the knee joint. If we look at kind of this back side angle, we can get a little bit better assessment of that. So again, as Dobbins plants, it looks like that knee gets forced into what we would call a Varus position. If we sort of draw some lines here, his torso is kind of going this way. We see that thigh is about in this direction, and then his lower leg is right here. So that position where the knee is outward like this, that's varus, the knee going outward, as opposed to valgus, the knee coming inward. When we go into this varus position, you can already see from just the image how much that's potentially going to stretch the structures on the outside portion of the knee, right? Everything out here on the knee is getting pulled as it wants to push outward. So we have to worry also about injury to the structures on the outside portion of the knee. The other interesting thing I think with all this is his foot is really in an awkward position as well. As he plants and comes through here, just look at the position of his foot relative to his upper body. So his foot is externally rotated out this way, his upper body's facing off this way. Anytime you have all these additional angles and torques on the joint, it's going to reproduce more forces that can see and cause injury. If we look at our biodigital anatomy tool, there's a couple of structures to highlight here. And like I said at the start of this video, it's really tough to predict how severe hyperextension is going to be. This severe of a hyperextension that Giannis suffered, he didn't even miss, I don't think, 2 weeks. I would have been convinced he'd have missed the rest of the playoffs, and he came back within a couple of weeks and led the Bucks to the NBA title. So these are really tough to predict how bad it's going to be, but they have the potential to be season ending for something like an ACL tear. The ACL and the PCL are the two ligaments that cross inside the knee joint, and part of what they're going to do is help prevent that knee from hyperextending and moving forward and backwards between the two bones in the knee. This is the back side of the knee, and so as all that stretches, you're pulling on all of these tissues and structures in the back of the knee. So at a minimum, you're usually talking about an injury to the capsule, sort of the lining that goes around the knee joint because it's getting stretched and pulled. Depending on severity and that in or out angle as well, the ACL and the PCL have to be on the differential. And then if you remember, I talked about that varus force, where if this is a right knee that we're looking at, the knee was kind of bowed out this way. There's a whole group of structures that sit back here on this outer kind of posterior corner of the knee called the posterolateral corner. And it's an area that's really susceptible to injuries with a hyperextension. Over on this side of the knee, we have the LCL that runs kind of north-south on the outside of the knee, but then also our meniscus. We have a muscle called the popliteus that sits over here. So there's a lot of structures in that area that could possibly be injured. So keeping in mind that anatomy here, as we look through this one more time, he plants, that knee gets hyperextended, and you can even almost see on the skin, the structures in the back of the knee are going to be stretched. Depending on the severity of the hyperextension and the angle that the knee is either inward or outward, you also run the risk of things like an ACL tear and a PCL tear. Typically with a hyperextension, you're talking about a minimum of a week or two because of the bone bruise that happens when those bones get pushed together. But like we saw with Giannis, sometimes these surprise us and they look a lot worse than they actually are. Either way, it's going to be really painful. So in the moment, it's not surprising that he had to be carted off the field, and that doesn't necessarily correlate with how bad this might be. This is really one of those things where we could be talking about a couple of weeks, or we could be talking about season ending, and the only way to know for sure is to be there doing his physical exam and to look and get the MRI to see exactly what could be hurt. So stay tuned, because again, unlike a lot of other injuries in sports, these hyperextensions are really tough to predict and hard to just kind of judge severity on based on just the way that they look, as we've seen with recent examples. So I hope this was still helpful to talk about the anatomy, kind of injury mechanism. I'm sorry I can't give you a more definitive answer because, to be honest, that's just the way that sometimes medicine is. But stay tuned for any updates on his MRI results. As always, let me know any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later.